My name is Samuel and I've been sober for 16 years. My drug of choice started off with speed and ended up as crystal meth. I was 16 years old and I was in a bedroom with one of my friends and he gave me some speed and changed my life. So when I started using speed, I started smoking speed at first and then I got involved with gangs and just the street life, and I ended up becoming part of a manufacturing and started learning about that, and then I just got stuck and started using crystal meth, started snorting it at first and then ended up smoking it and was stuck for about 6 years. My favorite thing about the drug was the consistency, and I was always on the go and I was always doing things. I never had time to sleep because I couldn't sleep. So I stayed stuck and I stayed on the streets and I stayed just robbing and pillaging and just being all out on meth. Well, some people would say mething around. I dealt with a lot of depression and anxiety. I really hated myself for being stuck and for using meth, but I never really got over that. I just continued to use more heavily every day. As time went on, it just got worse and worse and worse, and I just never really dealt with that until I started to become sober and had the opportunity to become sober, and then I started dealing with the mental health issues. Man, I would sleep a lot, of course, but it was somewhat like a flu. I would break out in sweats, I had a fever. And then the worst one that I had was when I was locked up in the county. I was in bed for about 6 days and couldn't get up. My bones were hurting, my body was hurting, I was throwing up, couldn't keep nothing down, and I ended up having to go to the hospital because I was really dehydrated and malnourished. Withdrawing in the county, it was really different because you didn't have the medical care, and the nurses, a famous phrase that the nurses always tell you is drink a lot of water. So during that withdrawal, I didn't really have anybody. There was people around there that didn't understand what I was going through and they just thought I was sick. And genuinely, I thought I was sick, but I didn't find out till later that I was actually withdrawing from meth just because of the heavy use. I was smoking a lot in a day because I had easy access to that. And there was never really any holdback when I asked for it. So due to the consumption and the amount that I was consuming every day, my withdrawal was really, really bad. And I didn't have what other people on the street had. I had, like I said, just straight from the point. And it was just a lot, So when I was withdrawing, it was a lot of body aches and a lot of throwing up and a lot of not being able to hold anything down without medical care. I didn't have somebody looking out for me or telling me, hey, you need to drink water, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. I didn't even have aspirin. It was just under the blankets trying to sweat it out. Washing my sheets in the shower at the county every other day, then laying on the bunk with nothing, but still sweating. It was really, really bad. One of the craziest stories, I was up for about 9 days. And I was sitting on the street on the block with some of the people that I considered to be my friends. And at that point in time, I always carried a gun with me because I was always paranoid. And I started seeing what I thought was people going in and out of a car, sneaking behind a trunk, and just, it was just starting to freak me out. And I didn't tell anybody. So what I ended up doing was I ended up shooting up an empty car. And when that happened, one of the people, again, that I consider one of my friends, put me in a chokehold and basically put me to sleep because I had been up for so long that I was starting to see things and hallucinate and hear things that, I reacted in a really bad way and brought a lot of unneeded attention to myself and the people that were around me. When you first, what I would consider like the recoup, you would sleep for a couple of days, you'd get up, you eat a healthy meal, and then you would start going back at it. And when I went on that run, it wasn't the worst run, but it was one of the worst. And as the days went on, more and more and more, I would starting to see things, starting to hallucinate, starting to hear things, feeling things like were crawling on my skin, became really uncomfortable with myself. I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror because I didn't want to see the person that I was becoming. And as time went on and it progressed, the hallucinations became worse and they became more physical to me. And I started seeing things and I started believing that those things were there. I would get up and I would be like, who's calling me? Because I hear somebody calling me and I was at the house by myself. And then that night it was the worst because I had been up for so long and I wasn't eating, I wasn't hydrating, I wasn't doing anything that I needed to. So I lacked the self-care while in my addiction that I just went off the deep end and became a real head case. My childhood, I was raised in a big family. I have 5 brothers and I have 2 sisters. I was raised by but I don't like to call my stepdad, but he was my dad. And in our family, both of our parents were recovering alcoholics, and my dad was a recovering alcoholic and an addict. So our family vacations were actually AA conventions and NA conventions. So we would be stuck in Al-Anon meetings and going through that motion of the program. But when my stepdad came in, my two older brothers had left because they didn't want to deal with the new authority figure. And then after that, my older brother, who I was really close to, ended up leaving. He fell in love, and he was about 16, I was about 13, and I was the middle child between my little brother and my older brother. So for me, it was a little bit different. I was too young to do what my older brother did, and I was too old to do what my little brother did. So that in itself built up its own resentments and its own anger issues within myself as a child. Our dad was there, but he wasn't there, if that makes any sense. He always made sure that we had what we needed, but he wasn't the type of dad to play catch with you or take you fishing, or just to give you those types of traits, what it would be to become a man. So we really became self-sufficient. My dad was very inconsistent. Him and my mom would get into arguments, and he would dip out on us. And he wouldn't leave for an hour or two. He'd leave for weeks, months at a time. It just really depended on the type of argument that had happened. And my mom had her own issues. My mom would always call me her sober baby, because when she got pregnant with me, she left my biological father. So in that time, she was having her own issues getting herself sober and clean while she was pregnant with me. When I was 14, I became really, really rebellious. Because my parents were very strict. We couldn't go out, we couldn't hang out with friends, we couldn't go to parties, we couldn't basically go to the park without anybody with us. So the first time I ran away from home, I got a taste of what I thought was the good life. And from that point on, I was always on the run, because I always wanted to go back to that. Because it was such a strict household, I just felt that freedom and I ran with it. And in that, I ended up in foster placement. I was a foster kid for about a year and a half. I stayed in West LA and I stayed in Compton. I got kicked out of both of those places for various reasons. I ended up at a group home. And in that group home, I got into a lot of fights just because of who I thought I was and who I believed I was. I was really angry at the world. And I remember when I was getting discharged from the group home, they told my mom 1 in 4 of kids that come through the state program will return in some type of incarceration. And my mom said, not my son. And I didn't have a record. But then when I turned 18, my record started. So I had my first county jail trip. And then it just became repetitious because I was in my addiction, my full-blown addiction at that point in time. And then at 19, I caught my first prison term. And when I caught my first prison term, I just thought I was the man on top of the world, because I felt like I had accomplished something. And that's how bad my mental state was at that time. But one memory that I have is when I walked in to get sentenced for state, is my dad was there. And he looked at me and you just seen like the pain in his eyes. And he just put his head down and just shook his head. And that just crushed me. And then from that point, that was a lot. It was a very pivotal moment in my life, but that wasn't the term when I decided that I was going to stop. I just went right back out. When I got paroled off that term, I relapsed again and I just went back at it. But on the last term that I served in 2005 to 2007, I lost my dad. And he died and I was in prison. And I remember that phone call. I was in my cell and the captain came to my door, called out my name. I got up, I went to the door and I looked to the right and there was a chaplain. And I looked at him and said, my dad died? And he was like, yeah. I was like, all right, cool. And he was like, you have a 30-minute phone call. And I told him, just give me a minute. And so I took a second and I went and made that phone call, called my mom. And obviously my mom was devastated at that time. And, talking to her and just hearing her out and that regret and that pain that I was feeling because I wasn't there for her, but I also wasn't there to tell my dad bye. that was a pivotal moment, because I didn't want my kids to not be able to tell me why. Yeah. It was when I paroled off my third term. I paroled and I came home. And at that point in time, I had 2 kids. I missed both of their first birthdays, the first steps that they took, their first words. And I was married at that time, and I was given an option. And the option was, either you can go now, not come back and go back to the things that you were doing before, or you can stay here and be a man and raise these kids. And I made a choice that I was going to be around for my kids, because I didn't want to be a weekend dad, and I didn't want to be a part-time dad. My kids were everything to me, and they still are. My kids are my world. But yeah, that was my rock bottom, because I knew at that point if I went back out, I was going to die. Because I had gone so far off the deep end the first time and in that addiction, and did so much that I knew that there would be no barrier, no stopping me on that next run. So for me, it was my kids. And when I got out on my last term and I was given that choice, and I decided that I was going to be a man and stay home and be a dad above anything, because more importantly, that was going to be a father. I was going to be the man that I wanted my son to be when he grew up. And I wanted to be the man that I would eventually want my daughter to marry, just to set that example and to set that bar. So I set a bar pretty high for myself. But at that time, I went into a men's home at Freedom. And my little brother was a director. And, I went in there and I was really closed-minded. And I didn't really want to hear about church or God or anything else. But for me, I turned to my higher power. And, I built a relationship, and that was the foundation of what built my recovery. So it really wasn't so much the positivity, because again, I had just paroled, so I was in the program mindset. So I was really programmable, because, some people may know is when you're locked up, you fall into a program. You wake up at a certain time, you go to bed at a certain time, you eat meals at a certain time, you're outside, you socialize for a certain amount of time. And those are all rules that are implemented. But when I went into the men's home, it was a lot of structure, but there was a lot of love, and there was a lot of understanding, and there wasn't judgment of what I had done or what I had done previously before getting there. It was just starting new and starting over and building, which then again reinstated my new mindset of being a dad and being a father, and becoming independent and not being addicted and not chasing the bag, but chasing my dreams instead. So those were the things that helped me in that home, and the camaraderie and the brotherhood of surrounding myself with people who were positive. One thing that my dad would always say was, if you don't want fleas, don't hang around with the dogs with the fleas. So I stayed away from those dogs, and I surrounded myself with people that were encouraging me and pushing me beyond my limit, in a positive way, to always reach for more and never settle. So at that point, I really learned a lot and just continued to move forward. Don't wait. Don't wait till you don't have a choice. Because going down that line, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're not going to have that choice. To where you're behind a steel door and you're not be able to look out for your family in a time of need. For me, I have a heart for dads and for kids that don't have their dads. Because, again, my dad was married my mom with 6 kids that weren't his. So just knowing what it is to be a dad, more importantly, what it is to be a father or a mother, is to not wait to stand your ground on your own. Because if you can't take care of yourself, for damn sure you can't take care of your kids. So if you need help, reach out. You're not alone. We've all been broken. Some of us are still broken. But it's never too late. You're not alone. You're not. You're suffering from addiction. Most of us have been there. And we know what it is to be in the trench and to be by yourself, or what you may feel like you're by yourself, but you're not. There are people who are willing to help you and go the extra mile for you. And people that believe in you and believe that you can be sober and believe that you can achieve the things that are deep in your heart that you may have gave up on. You know, just hold on to those dreams and reach out to somebody and let them know what you're struggling with. Because the longer you wait, the worse it's gonna get.